Thank you, Dimas. At this point, I'm going to only have Rosemary on Spotlight.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay, and your video looks really good. And then I am going to start the webinar so that the participants can come in. And after, at the hour mark, we can start. Starting the webinar now.
Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We'll take a few minutes to hopefully have a lot of participants joining. It is our pleasure to have this side event during the Science and Innovation Forum. It is an official side event prior to the forum, and we're pleased to be speaking about this important topic. So just a few moments before we get started. Thank you all. It's our pleasure to have organized this event with the Republic of Kenya and to hopefully have a good discussion with all of you. So welcome. Wonderful, let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining this event on improving Codex Alimentarius Processes to support the application of science and innovation for food safety. To start, just some quick housekeeping. Please note that this event is being recorded, and when entering the call, please ensure your name appears clearly. Otherwise, use the rename function on the participants list. As of now, you're all muted, but we will activate your microphone if you are putting forward a question, as we want this session to be as interactive as possible. Please also raise your electronic hand if you wish to intervene, but we also ask that you use the chat function, which might be less disruptive. Please do use the Zoom chat as well to introduce yourself and let others know where you're connecting from. We have measures in place to help maintain the integrity of the call. So should there be any disturbance, please just bear with us and we will restore order shortly. It's our hope that today's session will spark a very rich discussion on how the importance of Codex Alimentarius and the ways to support its processes and application of science and innovation for food safety. My name is Rosemary Navarrete, and I'm delighted to be joined by an excellent panel of speakers today. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome all of the participants who are here today and making time to join this discussion, notwithstanding such a busy week. So thank you. I invite you to introduce yourself again. Take a moment to do so in the chat. To start off this conversation, though, it's my great pleasure to invite opening remarks from Dr. George Abong, Kenya's National Codex Committee Officer and Professor. Over to you, Dr. Abong.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. I guess you can hear me clearly. And I'm delighted to join us online virtually today to talk about or to discuss informally this topic on improving Codex Alimentarius processes in order to support application of science and innovation in food safety. We all know that Codex, a global organization, generally intergovernmental of the United Nations system, endeavors to ensure that the consumers are protected against any form of foodborne illnesses through the development of various standards. And of course, it adopts international standards that are geared towards that exact form, but not only does the work of Codex protect only the consumers, but by a large in a large way, facilitates or promotes fair trade practices globally. And the standards that Codex develops are quite diverse. If you look at the Codex website, you will see that we have guidelines, and there are key guidelines that have been used very, very often by many people. And if you, for example, Google, you will find the guidelines for food hygiene practices, widely cited and very useful. Then the specifications, of course, which are quite a number, and we may not talk about the setting of maximum limits for food additives and contaminants. Again, these are very widely cited and used standards across the globe. And so even if you go through the other specifications, which are mainly commodity-based, Codex has got very great relevance when it comes to the international arena, and especially when we come into the aspects of food safety. And we all know that these works of Codex are done through committees. And these committees are quite diverse and, of course, sometimes multi-sectoral, and, of course, takes care of a number of aspects, because we know that when we develop standards, we normally use science, yes, but there is a lot of consensus needed in the process. And the committees, of course, work. In earlier days, people used to focus on physical work. But since the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, we all know that virtual work has increased tremendously. And we have found it's still useful to develop key standards through online systems. Now, a lot of committees, of course, meet to develop standards, whether it is virtual or physical. And these are given to the commission, these are given to commission to consider for adoption, usually at the annual meeting. And of course, the role of these standards are wide, one of which is to assure food safety and quality, facilitate trade, and of course, ensure that there is uniformity and confidence in the food products that we consume. So Codex in itself, therefore, make a very big contribution, even though these standards are voluntary, but since they are developed participatorily through the member countries, they find a lot of use in our current world. So then, as we sit to look at the processes and how to improve them, in order to take care of science and innovation, we are called to be able to hasten the process so that the process of developing standards are not overtaken by science and innovation. And that, my colleagues, is what we want to look at even as we delve into this topic. And I welcome all of you to be together with us in this topic going forward. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Dr. Abong, for that welcome. We appreciate it. Now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Marcus Lip, FAO Senior Food Safety Officer, who will be providing an overview of the topic. Over to you, Dr. Lip.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And yeah, Codex, one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I'm not just saying that because my job gets paid by FAO. So it is truly everybody who participated in Codex probably can understand a certain amount of fascination looking at all the various committees, at all the various activities that are going on, from microbiology to import-export regulations, to chemical contaminants, to definitions of certain foods. What is offal in one country and what is offal in another country, and where can we find some overlaps, which is important for residues of veterinary drugs, to pesticide residues and all the intricacy that are involved there. Totally fascinating. And I'm just scratching the surface. There's so many other committees that I haven't even mentioned. Fantastic, exciting, wonderful. Food is exciting for most people. And food is incredibly complicated, right? There's so many different things in this world that gets eaten by people. Food is complicated because we all have a very steep connection, psychological connection, cultural connection to food. Everybody here does, every single person. It's the big uniter. Everybody needs food. Everybody needs safe food. Every single person on this earth. And so it is united. It brings us together. We share food to build relationships. And this is all wonderful, but it can also divide us. And part of that is the discussion of this or the topic of this discussion today is, when do our views or different points and start to divide us, and how can we overcome that? How can we make our processes better to find common ground, to come to common agreements, and to come to a common agreement? What is safe enough? What is safe? What is fair enough in trade? How do we go forward there? So part of that is that, of course, all member states that are members of Codex Alimentarius, so it's governments, as was already mentioned by George, have rested their faith into science. So Codex is science-based. The foundations of Codex standards are rooted in science, and then the science has to come from somewhere. It is typically provided by FAO, in many cases jointly with WHO, to provide risk assessments, to provide opinions, to provide other facts, scientific facts that are important for the risk management decisions that are made by the members of Codex Alimentarius Commission. Because life is also more than science. Science is important, and it's the common basis of our understanding. It is our language, if you want, on which we agree. But then there is all kinds of other exigencies and necessities that people in different countries need, and that governments make decisions upon. There are cultural, religious preferences or needs that need to be respected in certain areas, and maybe different ones in other areas. So that's what makes it more complicated than to come together and come to some agreements. So there's plenty of room for improvement. On top of it, of course, science is not static. Science does improve. Science marches on every time. So we will, of course, and we have done so, we, FAO and WHO, in the past, to bring new science, new scientific results or observations to Codex, to the risk managers, to say, here is something you need to know. You may want to act on it. And so that's how we define our role. Now, we will hear from probably other panelists about some of the complications, so I'm not going into that. And most of you have been probably on Codex committees, so you understand that in reality, it is difficult often to come to agreements, to agree to something and to come to a way forward. But it's also encouraging that in many, 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 many cases, we always manage to do that. Codex participants, Codex members always manage to find this agreement. So I'll stop here before I talk too long and take time away from the panelists. So thank you so very much. Exciting topic. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Lipp. As usual, we can rely on you for simplifying and also explaining very well the complexity at hand. But let's keep in mind we're here for the Science and Innovation Forum. So I'm really looking forward to all of your insights on how we can improve. And you've started this discussion very well. So thank you. Now let me give the floor to Dr. Wiebke Meyer, Director of Regulatory Affairs for CropLife International. Over to you, Dr. Meyer.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for the kind introduction. I must say I'm now stealing again Markus Lipp's introduction, because I also wanted to start with, I'm so happy to be here to talk about my favorite topic, Codex Alimentarius. So why Codex Alimentarius? So Codex, as Markus and Dr. Obong already said, develops harmonized, science-based and risk-based food standards that protect the consumer and promote fair practices in food trade. So, and Codex standards are grounded in science and risk assessment, and that has been a principle in Codex Alimentarius since its beginning when it was established 60 years ago. This is very important for me because I'm having a scientific background, so I do love that Codex is based in science and risk assessment. As Marcus already mentioned, how is the scientific advice brought to the Codex? Codex has established expert bodies where independent scientists, experts, serve in their personal capacity. And one of those expert bodies is the joint FAO and WHO meetings on pesticide residues, the JMPR. Over the years, they have produced many internationally accepted data, and that is used by governments and researchers in industry worldwide. And they have, the publications that they are producing are considered as a international reference. So what is so great about Codex? And Marcus and Mr. Obong have already alluded to that. It is inclusive. It has almost every country of the world as a member. So 189 member states are part of the Codex Alimentarius Commission. And it is transparent because it enables also us as observers to participate in the process. And I think it's a great thing that the member states come together and decide by consensus on new standards and approaches going forward. For us as an industry, why is Codex so important? Because it enables us to bring innovation to farmers. Normally, setting maximum residue limits for pesticides is part of the registration process in many countries, but with a Codex MRL in place, we have a harmonized and internationally accepted standard established. This reassures farmers that can use the innovative crop protection products, that they are able to access international markets to trade their food internationally. So we, CropLife International, is an observer to Codex Alimentarius, and our members are playing an essential role in the Codex MRL setting process, because our members do provide most of the data that goes into the establishment of the MRLs. Every year, the Codex starts a data call-in where everybody has the opportunity to submit data, and our members make use of that and do submit the data, as do other stakeholders in the Codex process. All the information is then analyzed by the independent experts, and they are the basis to propose Codex MRLs that are then further advanced by the Codex Alimentarius or approved by the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Our members keep innovating, and hence more Codex MRLs will be needed in the future. As well, existing Codex MRLs need to fulfill the latest scientific requirements. As Marcus said, science is not a static thing, it keeps evolving as well. And with the increase in global food trade and demand for food, the demand for Codex MRLs will also increase in the future. So we as industry have observed that the Codex system has been working very well for the past 60 years. But in the recent years, we think it's more and more difficult that Codex can keep up with its demands for Codex MRLs, particularly in the pesticide residue area. On top, as Mr. Obong already mentioned, the global pandemic, which has forced us to work differently and remotely with all its advantages and disadvantages. But for the Codex work, I think it has shown that face-to-face meetings are needed in order that these experts can come together and discuss science and can agree on way forwards. So the pandemic has unfortunately resulted to a build up of a backlog. All overall, with the future demand for Codex MRLs that we are envisaging or that we are seeing on the horizon, in the next couple of years, we already see a demand of 3 times of the MRLs that are needed to be set or re-evaluated in the next couple of years. So we have reached out in the last couple of months to many Codex member states and other observers and stakeholders and shared our observations. And we have received a lot of support for our comments, but also a lot of support for Codex itself. Everybody agreed that Codex is very important, and it is of utmost importance that Codex maintains its independence, scientific rigor and reputation of the joint meeting of pesticide residues and the Codex Committee of Pesticides Residues. So how to solve the issue is now the much bigger question. It became clear that there's no single solution to the problem and that we will all need to work jointly. We have raised it at the Codex Committee on Pesticide Residues in July this year, and we are very pleased and happy that the Codex members agreed to establish an electronic working group, which is chaired by the United States and co-chaired by Costa Rica, France, Germany, and Uganda. And I want to thank them again that they are picking this work up. That look into possible enhancement of the work on the management of the Codex Committee of Pesticide Residues and the Joint Meeting of Pesticide Residues. We will engage in that work, and we are very convinced that this work will deliver solutions. However, from our conversations, more needs to be done, and we all need to work jointly to improve, to enhance Codex work, not only in the pesticide residue area, because innovation will keep coming to the market and is needed to tackle the challenges of today and tomorrow, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and ensuring that agricultural productivity is there on the existing farmlands. And for that, farmers need tools and the largest toolbox that they can have. So therefore, Codex will be even more important going forward. And therefore, I want to raise here the importance for Codex in this work. So if I can leave you with one message, in my view, Codex is an amazing system that governments have created 60 years ago, and it should be in all our interest that Codex is also fit for the next 60 years. It has all the important elements in place. It is grounded in science and risk-based. It is independent. It takes decisions by consensus and enables harmonized global standards that are recognized all over the world. And it ensures that the traded food that we eat is safe for consumption. So I want to point out that we are committed to continue working on that, and that we are ready to support further, and I encourage everybody to use Codex standards for trade. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Over to you.
Thank you, Vibke, for your impassioned support. You're a great champion of this work, and we appreciate your insights. Now I'm really happy to bring that down to a more concrete and perhaps pragmatic view, and it's always great to have on a panel a farmer such as our next. Mr. Roger Chavreau is a Canadian Canola Growers Association board member, but also a farmer from Alberta, Canada. It's a pleasure to give you the floor, Mr. Chavreau. Over to you.
Well, thank you very, very much. Good morning or afternoon, I guess, or even evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss the importance to a farmer of what Codex means. As mentioned, my name is Roger Chavreau. I am the owner and general manager of a company called Century 12 Farms based in Killam, Alberta, Canada, which is part of the Canadian Prairies. I mention the name of my company, Century 12 Farms, because it gives you a bit of information about my farm. It was started by my great-grandfather 110 years ago in 1912, and it actually makes it one of the oldest farms in this particular region of the prairies. It also makes me a fourth and my son a fifth-generation farmer. Currently, we seed approximately 5,000 acres or 2,025 hectares of cropland each year. Our main crops are hard red spring wheat, malt barley, and canola. And for those of you who are not familiar with canola, it is Canada's version of oilseed rape, and it's traditionally used in vegetable oils or animal feeds. But recently, its use pattern has increased to be included as a feedstock for biofuels. Canola is, in fact, one of Western Canada's largest crops and one of the biggest contributors to our bottom line. Over the last 110 years, we have seen tremendous amount of advancements in innovation and technology, from farming with a horse and plow here to modern tractors that use GPS monitors, satellite imagery that allow us to use precision data for the application of fertilizers, hybrid seeds, and modern crop protection products. Science is what made this innovation and technology possible. And as a result, we grow significantly more tons per hectare than we ever have before. As an example, when I first started farming 35 years ago, a canola crop was 20 bushels, a good canola crop was 20 bushels to the acre. Today, with the use of modern crop protection products and breeding techniques, our production is closer to 50 bushels to the acre, and on a good year, over 60. So it's more than double. At the same time, the science behind the innovation and technology that has allowed me to incorporate pest management practices that have improved the quality of my soil, has given me more effective weed control, improved crop protection, and better plant genetics that will withstand plant diseases and the changing climate. For example, crop protection products that we use today has allowed Canadian farmers to move to a no-till or minimum tillage cropping practices. As a result, we've improved soil coverage. We have less wind and water erosion. We've increased our soil organic matter. We have less GHG emissions because we go across the fields with several less times with our equipment, and we sequester more carbon in our soils. In fact, Western Canadian soils have gone from a carbon source to a carbon sink. That's the general overview of the importance of science has played in Canada as well as the rest of the world, and when it comes to food production and security. Now I'm going to move on to a little bit more of a specific topic, and that is the importance of Codex. Even though we have made great strides in science that has enhanced our food security and production, as well as the financial well-being of us producers, we still need more. The Food System Summit identified technology, innovation, data, and a larger enabling system as key accelerators to achieve food system transformations. Codex has an important role in delivering these by supporting farmers' access to new technologies and the use of best available science to provide consistent rules for which farmers globally can follow when growing crops. These rules provide certainty to producers, and they will not lose market access when they adopt new technologies to adapt to new production challenges from either a changing agronomic environment, such as resistant weeds or pests, or climate change. Canadian canola farmers export 90% of our product to countries all over the world. A missing MRL in one of our importing countries could create significant barriers to trade and/or delay the introduction of a desperately needed tool in our crop production systems. While Codex provides a robust science-based process for setting MRLs, farmers today are increasingly experiencing erosion of international standards for pesticide residues, with countries increasingly adopting national lists and/or individual country standards. The proliferation of these various MRLs in different markets adds risk and uncertainty, and as it stands, will only get worse over time. Moving away from harmonized standards for crop production tools, we need to protect our crops against disease, insects, weeds, and to produce a sustainable crop generates unpredictability, market risks, and in certain cases, financial loss for us producers. Where zero tolerance is applied for a missing MRL in an importing country, shipments risk being rejected and/or farmers' grain disallowed at point of sale if a crop protection tool was used and has not been approved in the export market, creating significant financial risk for us. Farmers around the world need a standard, not a patchwork of leveraging science and innovation. Ideally, there would be one set of international standards that all countries use in ensuring trade flows, and that farmers benefit from the latest science and innovation while ensuring that we have safe food to eat. We need more Codex MRLs, and we need them more quickly than they're being approved today. We also need more Codex member countries to agree that this is an important factor. As noted by Wilkie, there is an opportunity for Codex to perform in its role more effectively by addressing current capacity challenges, embracing new methods of evaluation, and ensuring that adequate resources are available. Canadian canola farmers are not alone in this problem. Farmers worldwide share similar stories. In conclusion, for farmers to fully enhance science or harness science, innovation, and technology, a larger enabling framework is required. Farmers need strong safety rules to facilitate trade and access to innovation. As noted, delays in registrations of technology impact farmers, timing access to new products or new uses, and limits our available toolbox to increase production, to manage evolving pests and agronomic pressures, and to ensure we have a more resilient food supplies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. We really appreciate that perspective. And we think it adds really value, as usual, the farmer's perspective to discussions related to agriculture, and especially with respect to Codex. Now, let me give the floor to Mr. Peter Wilson, board member at Pulse Australia and the Global Pulse Confederation. We're really happy that you're joining at this late hour, Peter, and over to you. Let me give you the floor.
Hi, from where I am, it's good evening. Thanks, Rosemary, and thanks very much. It's great to be part of such a luminous panel. And I can only endorse the comments that Roger has made in terms of the impact of getting it right, going right back to the farm level. It's absolutely critical. You could say that the production side is where the rubber hits the road, but the international trade side, where I've been working in for 30 years, is where we would say the proverbial can hit the fan. And there is no question we have seen over 30 years, certainly from an Australian perspective, we have seen a regional focus on application of standards, and they have been harmonised nationally. So we've seen the iterations where states had separate standards and separate testing methodologies for the same product produced across state borders. We've now seen that harmonised into national pulse standards in particular. And my view is that we will see Codex become more and more important as we live in a much more integrated and interconnected world. And we have to have our risks assessed based on science. And we do see internationally where non-tariff, a mixture of tariff and non-tariff trade barriers from individual countries. And I think it is so very important to continue the work that Codex has done over 60 years to continue to, I guess, draw those strands together to give both the producers and the traders and the importers and consumers the confidence that their product is shrouded in food safety. And I think of my time in agribusiness and production agriculture and international trade over 3 decades. And I have seen significant evolution, not necessarily revolution, but an evolution in standards. We have much tighter, more stringent standards today than we ever had before. And that's come about because of investment in plant genetics. We've got some incredible geneticists who are doing exceptional things with in plant breeding, crop husbandry, and of course we've heard from CropLife here in terms of how they're keeping chemistry ahead of the challenges in production agriculture. And harvesting technology has changed immensely in 3 decades in terms of what can be done under a range of challenging production conditions to produce a plate-ready food straight from the paddock, and that's been absolutely incredible. And then the storage and transport, and particularly in Australia, we have significant challenges with regards to stored grain insects, which means we've got to be very mindful of MRLs on what's applied to the grain, whether it's a fumigant or a contact pesticide, but in particular, in-crop chemical applications can pose significant risks if individual countries go about adding a level of detection which simply isn't practical, is not based on science. And I think the other big thing that's changed in 3 decades of international trade is the capacity to test. We now have much more refined technology, and therefore, if chemicals are being disabused or not being used in the correct fashion, today it can be detected quite readily. So I think the combination of really good science-based risk assessment on those MRLs, and we accept that there's very, very good testing today that provides confidence that people are meeting their requirements. If I can probably just finish by saying, in terms of my opening, is that ultimately no standards, no trade, no food, no money. So, I applaud what Codex has been able to do over 6 decades. And I think Codex becomes more and more important as we seek to harmonise what is now national standards into international standards.
Thank you so much, Peter. Very optimistic words I'd like to hear, and also giving us some focus on what is needed and the challenges. I'm really happy to give the floor again to Dr. Abong. He's going to speak about the perspective from the African region and the role of Codex in ensuring food safety and scientific innovation for farmers there. Over to you, Dr. Abong.
Thank you, Rosemary, once again. I'm coming back on this topic, but now I want to look at the aspects concerning the role of Codex, especially when it comes to assuring food safety. And we are looking at the space of scientific innovation from our African perspective. We would appreciate that, and this has been indicated before with my colleagues, that the Codex standards are based on science, and this science has got quite some level of rigor. And it is not only science that bring out the standards. We know that consensus becomes key. This is where diplomacy and scientific knowledge come in. And many times you, of course, find that even in the African region, we may disagree on even a very simple parameter, depending on our different perspectives. Now, but the process, of course, then needs to, because it is based on science and science is dynamic, it must then allow for new innovations. And innovations, of course, come in and go day in, day out. They are not static, and that means that even as we develop the standards, we need to have that in mind. And sometimes you find that we create certain aspects of a standard that will require a revision whenever there is a new innovation. But the aspect of innovation should be taken over by any standard if that standard is progressive, in my view. So because of the nature of the standards, of course, the Codex standards are recognized, of course, as authoritative when it comes to trade agreements. And that is there is no argument about that. And of course, if you look then at the Codex issues and the process of development, you will see that sometimes the issues have got their complexity. And the complexity involved can be a challenge in the process, that it can be a bottleneck in the progression of any standard development. Now, my perspective is based in African context, and the African context is quite unique in itself because most of the production is done by small, medium enterprises that actually go ahead to process the food products. Now, when you have got many a large number of processors and a large number of producers, sometimes uncoordinated, it may become very difficult, first of all, to integrate an innovation, and even when it comes to adoption. And so in that respect, we could look at, in that context, what could be the key enablers that we have in the African region. If you look at the key enablers, one of the things that we will appreciate from our African region is, of course, the willingness of the current population to actually uptake what comes in through innovation. That is, of course, something which has changed over the years. And the African population, as you know, this progressive change probably could be due to the young population that we have. And there is quite a lot of diversity in terms of the population, in terms of diverse preferences, in terms of the mindset that we have. And that actually can be a good thing, even though it may have the other part of the negative side. And so if you look at the enablers in the African region, we currently have a lot of inter-regional trading blocks. I come from East African bloc, where we currently have got quite a lot of harmonized standards. And when it comes to then looking at the African region, Codex region, the CC Africa, then we are able to come into the table as a region with some already harmonized mindset. That makes the development easier and faster rather than when we go back to our own different segments and countries. But there is also the existence of organizations that have now taken keen interest to ensure that the African regions also participate in Codex standards development. And in this case, you will find AU-IBA is doing quite a lot of work when it comes to ensuring that African region is able to participate in the standards development. And not only that, there are many others that exist. But what makes the topic of today of interest to us is currently we have got quite a good move in terms of collaboration among risk assessors. There is, of course, some level of a pool of experts that have been trained within and outside. And I belong, for example, to one of the East African expert group that is an alumni of a training program from Belgium. We have come together to look at the risk assessment in the region and look at how we can make a contribution as a body of experts. That now make the work quite interesting when it comes to the global arena. And in that aspect, you will find that we find much use when it comes to harmonized food standards and guidelines. And in this respect, we are proud to note that in the process of development of the standards, we are waiting for one standard, which is harmonized guideline for development of food laws, which we believe will go a long way in order to change the landscape and actually improve our processes. However, we remain to deal with a number of challenges. Remember, I said diversity brings in some aspects of the good part and the bad side. Now, when you have quite a lot of diverse population which speak different language and give different practices, for example, in Kenya, you have got over 40 different language speaking people. To have them in one mind and agree on one aspect normally takes time, but I think with progressive minds, we are getting out of locked mindset, and this is good for standards development, and especially where we come to embrace science and logic in the process. Of course, we still have to deal with the issue of data acquisition as well as data preservation and use. You know that without data, you cannot make any progressive standards. And that data which we need to use must be acquired scientifically. And that's where science makes a great sense. So there are still a lot of challenges that we deal with in that aspect because of resource limitation. But we are also seeing progressively that African governments are increasing their capitation to research and development. However, we also still note a lot of technical and administrative challenges that exist among member countries. And these could result out of different uncoordinated organizations doing a similar thing. In this respect, I know that most of African countries are now formulating food laws, food policies that actually bring together all aspects and eliminate a lot of uncoordination. In this case, the Kenyan scenario, we have actually developed a food safety policy that is now waiting for the parliament to just pass it. And that will bring all the bodies under one umbrella, under one coordination, and that brings things into perspective of a quicker process, but that also integrates science and innovation in the process. We also are dealing with a lot of evolving trends. And that's what I said, the African perspective could be quite different. We have, of course, a standard on street foods, but street foods of our nature evolve so rapidly. A long time ago, the street foods we knew, well, you go to where it is being cooked, it is served and you eat it. And then you used to eat it when it is hot, and you don't have a problem of, most cases, you didn't have a problems of unsafe food. But the evolving trends here now, there is now the packaging of that street food, but there is also the other trend where things like vegetables are now being prepared because people are looking for convenience. They are just prepared. Yours is to go buy it before it is cooked, and then you prepare it in your kitchen. Now, those innovations that keep on cropping, and we see this even in leafy vegetables being prepared, cut, and they are just waiting to be bought and be used. Those are new trends that are developing that we must move with speed to see how we are able to ensure that they are safe, even as we use our scientific knowledge to train and do all and acquire data in those aspects. We also know from our context that at times political interests may overtake the scientific interest, but these are things that is not overall, but they are based on a case-by-case basis. Those are things which require scientists then to adopt a more diplomatic sense, but not losing the science, which actually informs the policies that need to be developed. And last but not least, Rosemary, I think in our context, we still grapple with self-regulation, which would for me be a better approach when people are able to self-regulate. Remember, I said we are dealing with a number of small-holder farmers, small-scale producers, small-scale micro enterprises, sometimes uncoordinated, and that becomes an issue. However, all things are not lost. We are seeing a lot of effort from governments to organize these producers, these small micro enterprises into groups so that they are able to be coordinated, and therefore it becomes easy to actually ensure that the standards are enforceable. My last point is that for food safety in this context requires concerted efforts, and therefore the work of sensitizing the producers, the processors and distributors remain an aspect for both the scientists as well as governments of the body. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abong, and for Kenya's leadership. We truly appreciate that leadership regionally, as well as here at FAO within this topic. And we definitely will look forward to your support, as well as other member states, some of them who are on the line, who are being asked to take a role in defending science and championing it, as well as Codex. And we look forward to supporting them in that effort. Now, apologies for some difficulties with our chat function, but we do ask you to put in the question and answer questions that you would like. We have concluded our panel discussion and are going to move into that moderated question and answer session. And here, we really do hope that you can have, or we can spark some discussion on how we can help each other through this difficult but very, very valuable process and in the lead up to November's Codex Alimentarius Commission. So with that, I would really like to open up the discussion to the moderated question and answer. I do see that in the Q&A, there was a question posted. Let me read that out for everyone. It seems most presenters, from Bjorg Skotnes says, it seems most presenters are talking about farmers. Can you say something about how Codex relates to aquatic food? Not sure who to provide this question to. When in loss, I would go to Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a great question, because in many cases, we talk about terrestrial food, we talk about animal food, about plant-derived foods. Well, not that fish are not animals, but terrestrial animal-derived food and terrestrial plants. And there's much activity going on, but then we tend to not include in our language the aquaculture part, where there is seaweed, where there is, of course, aquatic animals. that are harvested, that are used as food, that are hugely important for nutrition and for livelihoods around the world. And this is an absolutely great point. So there are similar considerations, as we just heard, apply to aquatic food as they apply to terrestrial animals, food derived from terrestrial animals, or from plant foods, which is more the focus here today. So there is a whole committee for fish and fishery products that focuses on specific questions, but there's also in the contaminants committee, there were discussions about ciguatera poisoning and how to prevent that from happening, a very specific aquaculture problem for that applications. We have work presented on seaweed, food safety in seaweed, that is also in the contaminants committees. There are residues of veterinary drugs that are important to aquaculture that are evaluated for the safety of aquaculture food or food derived from aquaculture where these drugs have been used. There are pesticides that are used in plants that are grown to become fish food that are also evaluated for the safety of the food that is derived from aquaculture then produced under those circumstances. So this is all baked into the Codex process. And from that angle, I would say there is no fundamental difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Hopefully that answered the question in the Q&A. I see that Guillermo, alternate representative, Mr. Guillermo Rodolico from Argentina asks for Roger. Our panelist farmer, what is one thing decision makers can do to assist your farm?
Thanks, Rosemary. Well, it's actually hard to narrow it down to just one thing, but I guess ultimately we are in need of new technology. We are constantly faced with new challenges. Resistance to pests, for example, is a major factor that we have here on the prairies. I'm constantly faced with resistant weeds. So we need new technologies to handle these things. We're struggling right now with trying to find old products that will try and fix the problems we have today. So that's one thing for sure. The other one is market access. We need to make sure that these products, when we do get them, are safe and that they're will be accepted worldwide. So I guess ultimately, it all boils down to we need to ensure that the decision makers and the policies that are being created by the different governments are based on good science and that we have access to them as quickly as we possibly can. Hopefully that answers the question.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I don't see any additional questions, but I do have one myself, and perhaps this one is for Dr. Meyer Wittke. What are the possible solutions that were raised in your discussions? You mentioned the electronic working group and all the work that they will have going forward, but can you anticipate some of those issues that are being discussed and perhaps how laymen such as us can get involved or help other people get involved in that process?
Oh, thank you for that question, Rosemary. So yeah, we had many discussions with many people that are involved in Codex, many Codex member states, but also other observers. And yeah, unfortunately, there's not a single thing that will magically solve everything and increase the output. So several things were raised, and we need to assess whether they are feasible to implement short-term, long-term, or what changes are needed to implement. So there are a couple of solutions proposed. I think the work of the independent experts was highly evaluated because they do that in their private free time, in their own capacity, yeah, so those experts need more support, or we do need more experts to do that work. And yeah, so that is one of the solutions that is seen, but whether that is feasible to obtain more experts that would like to do this work voluntarily, that is also something that needs to be seen. Another solution would be to maybe establish a fixed panel of experts and do not rely on the voluntary work of experts any longer. Other things maybe come with more funding and resources to the science bodies, but also to the Secretariat of Codex. And the joint secretariats, because yes, there is minimum work force actually provided. I was surprised actually how few full-time employees are working on Codex itself. So it is maybe if there would be more support provided, it would help to increase the processes and increase the output. Other things are related to funding. I think they are running on an annual or biannual cycle, and that is good, but it does not give the necessary predictability or planning security to hire ad hoc resources or experts in that are needed and so on. So so budget alone will not fix it. So it needs to come with some other improvements as well, or other changes that would allow certain processes, as I understand, but these need to be explored. Also from our side, our members are always eager to submit the best possible dossiers, and we are collecting every year feedback from the experts, how they found the dossiers, and we are taking that feedback and trying to improve things on our side as well. So I think the solution needs to come from many angles that are involved in Codex, and I think I'm convinced that if we all work together, that we will make that, but it needs a lot of dialogue, openness, flexibility, and willingness. And I hope that going forward, and with the electronic working group that has been established under the CCPR now, I hope that with that we can kick it off, and in the years to come we can make Codex fit for the next 60 years.
Well, thank you very much, Vipke, for that answer. I do see a couple more questions, but before I hand over or read out the questions, maybe I can give the floor to Marcus to give some, let's say, clarification on what resources you do have available in terms of staff, and whether there is a need. I know that the funding question is never something easy to ask. It's like asking Santa for gifts, and with an ever reducing budget. But it's so important, this work. It is World Food Day. Make your plea, Marcus. You have the most supportive people here.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, it's really lovely, and thanks to everybody for this unwavering determination and support to Codex Alimentarius, and all the highlights of how important and valuable that work is. So it's absolutely fantastic to hear that. So in general, Wiebke has mentioned this already. So the FAO and WHO provide services, the secretariat, to the Codex Alimentarius Commission, all its committees. I think there's 12 of them or 15, I forgot, but it's a double-digit number if I'm remembering correctly, plus all the electronic working groups, and some of those committees have a lot of electronic working groups going. And this is all, support of that is provided by the Secretariat for the Codex Alimentarius. It's located within FAO. It's actually joined between FAO and WHO, also budgetarily joined. So there are, not that somewhere a small double-digit number of people that work on that, and they're very active, also very much on the road, because these committees are all over the world. So they do what they can. On the scientific advice side, we have probably equally a 10, 12 people kind of number, if at all that much, probably a little bit less number of people in the joint secretariats that are in FAO and WHO. Most of this is jointly done, because the two organizations complement each other from their focus and expertise areas. So yeah, there are not that many people, right? Once you get to know us all, then there is sooner or later, it's always the same people showing up again, which is exciting, gives us a lot of input, a lot of visibility for the different needs and work of the committees, which is fascinating. But resources are tight, as was highlighted. Now, everybody calls for more resources, so that's trivial. We need more resources too. Fine, but they need to come from a source that does not present a conflict of interest, which is then one of the restrictions within all the organizations, FAO and WHO, which means, governments are okay. Some other constructs can be looked for, but we don't have a pay-to-play service. So there's no way for industry to say, I want this evaluation, here's money, please do. Right? That's not how we operate, and that's not how we can operate. So yeah, our work needs preparation, needs planning, because also the industry needs time to present and to prepare the dossiers. This is not a trivial undertaking from any party. So we are having years in planning cycle, at least 1 year, maybe 2-year planning cycles. That is the predictability of funding that we need. And that's currently not necessarily compatible with the funding cycles of governments. Problem. And the experts. So allow me to give me a huge shout out and a huge thank you to our independent experts. We have many of them. I mean, we operate 4 or 5 different expert committees, and we have ad hoc committees, and each of them has 10, 20, 30 people on them. So we are easily, in the hundreds there. And they devote a huge amount of time. Throughout the pandemic, it was absolutely amazing because let's say the time differences were most unfortunate for some of them. And so, yeah, Peter has that joy currently. So it's always night in Australia and New Zealand. And depending on where you are in that part of the world, it's really unfortunate timing. But they kept working with us. They kept supporting us, even when their employers sometimes said, you know what, you can still show up during the day. So this is huge. The train it had on people during the pandemic is huge. And we are not the only ones. It was difficult for everybody. So fine, but there are only so many volunteer experts that do that work. And that can be enhanced, can be enlarged, but needs preparation. There's a little bit of prep time that we need to do that, and for the people to be able to engage. So yeah, we are happy to discuss any and all. There is no quick solution. Lastly, if I just may say that, one of the image problems, if we want, that Codex has, is that at times the decision making seems to be hopelessly stuck due to polarized thoughts, considerations, and a seemingly lack of desire to come to mutual agreeable outcomes. Those are political considerations that Codex members bring to Codex meetings, and they do what they do, and they do what they need to do to satisfy other political considerations. That is not helping. It is very frustrating for experts to put in a lot of work just to see this lingering forever, because nobody has the willingness to make this and implement this into a global standard. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I definitely call for greater discipline and focus on those discussions that are so important. More than discussions, but actually pulling through this work. So I see a question for Peter. Peter, a participant asks, what can Codex do better for the pulses sector which you represent? Can you respond?
Yeah, thanks, Rosemary, and thanks for the question. Pulses represent, I guess, a relatively small part of the international grains market. There's about 1 million tons a day of grain that moves around the world, so it's an enormous industry. The pulses are obviously a very small part of that. Probably 3 to 5% of the global grain trade is the pulse trade, but absolutely critical because pulses are used almost as they come out of the field, which makes them a very efficient food source, very safe food source, very low carbon footprint. So they're fantastic. So anything that would facilitate trade to be faster and more disciplined and more streamlined would be of value. So Codex, I do think there's an opportunity to further harmonise Codex standards. I think historically, people are very possessive of their standards. Australia has standards, the Canadians have standards. I'd say the Canadians have lower standards than Australians, but that's a separate discussion. But people are possessive of their standards. But I think we are living in a much more interconnected, fast-moving, integrated world, and therefore we should be, I think, embracing Codex more on an international trade basis. I think it would make trade more streamlined, and particularly one of the big elephants in the room is MRLs. We do see far too many countries flippantly setting MRLs without it being risk assessed from a science-based, and that's of grave concern to us. So I think if we can work together as exporting nations with some of those importing countries and just try and harmonise the standards, but in particular the MRLs, I think that would help streamline and reduce risk in the pulse trade.
Thank you so much, Peter. I do also want to give the floor. I see a question, I think, Dr. Abong, if you're able to speak to. It says, how does innovation affect existing standards? Dr. Abong?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think when an innovation happens and you realize that an innovation can solve a problem, or it actually then at some times just indicate that some of the key descriptions or parameters you made on a food standard no longer hold, then it actually acts to either facilitate review of existing standards, or it gives us a new way of looking at things differently, so that when we develop standards, we then ensure that the standards are able to take care of any innovation that comes in. And that is where now we need to focus more, in my view, on horizontal standards rather than looking at the vertical standards, which are more of specific food commodities, in my view. So that is what I can say in that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abong. I think we may have a time just for one quick answer to a question. Dr. Meyer, if you can keep that your answer a bit brief, I would like to close afterwards. So there's a question for you. It says, you mentioned about working together. How can we make sure that the work of independent experts can be taken into consideration by Codex, but also to the different governments?
I think the work of the independent experts, like the experts of the JMPR, is definitely taken into account by the Codex Committee of Pesticide Residues, because that's the basis for their discussion to assess, to make the risk management decision in their committee. The reports, and I think if Marcus wants to add on that, they are always published. So the JMPR meets normally once a year, and they do publish their reports with a very extensive summary of all their findings. So that report is publicly available, and also for governments to follow, and also for the governments that are the Codex members that are then coming to the Codex Committee for Pesticide Residues to review and to discuss and decide on those MRLs.
Thank you, Vibke. With that last answer, I'm really happy to give the floor to Dr. Lip for his closing remarks. This is World Food Day, and I'm hoping that he will actually tie it all together. But before doing so, let me thank you all participants for being on this call today. And please do not hesitate to contact me if you'd like to join, discuss further with us, see how we can work together. We are always available to brainstorm in any way to support Codex, to enhance it, and of course, to celebrate the 60 years. So over to you, Marcus.
Thank you so much. And yes, it is a fantastic achievement of all the governments in the world, but not just the governments. It's also the observers, organizations like the ones represented by Dr. Meyer here, and there's others that support the work in Codex through provision of data, through active participation in meetings. It is absolutely wonderful, and it has created the 60 year of vibrancy and of progress that Codex could make, and the standards that have been set. Now, much has been said about the inability of Codex to be fast enough and to be responsive enough, and that's fair and that's good. But let us not cloud completely out the progress that has been made at Codex. There have been many standards that have been issued. There may have been not the one most desired pesticide, MRL. But then there were others. There are other food groups. There are other areas where this work is important and where much progress has been made, and that was fantastic. So it is nonetheless, it is important to us to of course listen to all the concerns of all the members of Codex, members of FAO, which are also governments, stakeholders in the food systems, which are people represented here. And it was very, very interesting to follow the discussions, also the questions and the explanations that came with them. So thank you everybody for participating, for presenting here, and thanks to you, Rosemary, and your organization for organizing that. So we all agree food safety is important. We all want safe food, and even more, we all want enough food. Right. There is the other aspect, that's food security. In many high-income countries, that is absolutely taken for granted because there is never any shortage when one walks into a food supermarket. But that's also the luxury of those who are not poor. And there are other scenarios, even in high-income countries. So let us not lose focus of SDG goal 2, zero hunger, right? So eliminate hunger. To quote a former Director General of FAO, there cannot be food security without food safety. So that's one of the importance of Codex. The other importance of Codex is, of course, for trade. And without trade, there is no economic development, right? And much of the economic development, in particular with low and middle income countries, is connected to agricultural trade or trade of agricultural products. So that's where Codex plays a role. That's where Codex is critical, and we've heard that today from various stakeholders, and that is fantastic. And we have to work together. We have to make sure that we can solve our questions of tomorrow, which will be shaped is how do we feed ever more people? How do we feed ever more people in urban scenarios where the transportation lines and the logistic becomes more complicated? How do we change our food systems, transform our food systems to respond to the need to become sustainable? We know we are not sustainable currently in many aspects of our life. We understand we need to change that. How do we do that without compromising food safety? How do we do that without compromising food security? Right? We can, of course, lower or make food safety standards more and more stringent, but then we throw away more and more food. That is not a sustainable way forward. Where is that balance? How do we combine all these different elements into our decision making? And that touches Codex and goes way beyond Codex, because Codex has a very specific mandate, but also makes sometimes discussion at Codex difficult. I think these are problems for us all to solve, because these are huge problems, and these are the problems of the world, if you want, and they require every stakeholder to play their part to come up with a solution, because fundamentally we have to figure out sustainability. We have to figure out how to produce enough food for everybody, and how to make this a safe food for everybody. So I hope I lived up to your expectations, Rosemary, in trying to summarize it and tie it all together. Thank you so much.
Always, Marcus. And we have a couple of minutes left. If there's any comments or questions, I will tell you that we are looking for any opportunity to discuss and brainstorm together prior to the CAC. And we'll be reaching out to many of you, and I look forward for you to reach out to us and see how we can continue this discussion to ensure that it will be a smooth commission as much as possible, and due to the complexities, of course, but also to make sure that we continue this debate, which is valuable and, like you said, is so relevant and critical to food security, and in light of today's World Food Day, but also so important, for all of the regions. It is a global value, global public good, Codex and food standards, and we should be promoting them through a rich support and discussion through all actors. So thank you so much. I thank you all for your time, and I'm sure this will not be one of the last times we speak. So take care.
Maybe if I just may add one final remark, sorry for that, but you just stimulated a thought. I would love to continue these discussions, absolutely. Maybe to just make a bold postulate here. If we today knew the solutions already to our problems, we probably would have implemented them. But we don't. We didn't because we don't. So we need to create solutions that we may not have thought about it, at least in that context today, to solve the problems that we have discussed here at this meeting. That requires the input from all of us. That cannot just come from FAO or from WHO or from the Codex Secretariat because here's a problem, right? Make it go away. That's not how we can solve these problems. I think they are deeper. I think they are larger, and so we need to come collectively to a decision that where we find a solution or a package of solutions that we decide we believe in them. They are worth fighting for because they will be. It will be necessary to work hard for them. They will not come easy. Otherwise, we would have done that already, right? The easy stuff that gets done easily. So it hasn't been done, so there's most likely no easy solution. So let's think about what could be the difficult one, and which one do we want to tackle? Where can we all align behind them? And then let's try to move in that direction. So thank you again. Apologies.
Perfect closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.